Okay, well, speaking of keeping good players, and that's what I want to talk about here. The two elephants in the room, obviously one is bigger than the other, but Austin Matthews and William Nylander. So, what is your gut telling you about these two players? Obviously, they're both eligible to sign on July 1st. What's your gut telling you about these two players? Are they going to sign? If so, is it going to be on July 1st? Is it going to get pushed all the way until the final buzzer, like the first Nylander contract? Like what's your gut telling you? And for how much, by the way?
Yeah, I'll start with Matthews because he's obviously the bigger fish. My gut says yes, he will sign because I think MLSC will do anything they can do and reasonably can do as they should to keep him around. I think the situation is slightly different than maybe it was projected to be earlier in the year, where I thought this guy coming off a 60-goal season is probably coming in guns blazing, asking for $15 million a year, and he's going to be the highest paid player in league history. There will be pressure from the NHLPA to keep pushing the ceiling higher and to attain a contract that is likely the highest in the league. But this is a guy who he scored 60 goals once. Yes, you can never take that away from him. It's an unbelievable milestone. He won a Hart. He won the Rocket. He's got all the accolades. But this is also a guy who's as I said, he's done it once. More often than not, he's a 40 to 45 goal scorer.
Yep.
We'll give him 50. Let's say 40 to 50 goal scorer.
And to average that is insane. But
to average it is like insane. I'm not taking anything away from him, but
we're being realistic here.
We're being realistic. Is a 45 goal scorer, as consistent as he may be, is he $3 million more valuable than McDavid? No. Is he $2 million more valuable than McDavid? And I'll say McKinnon? No. So I think you're probably looking at a scenario, or I would be pushing for a scenario as the team where, I think you have to kind of be resigned to the fact that this guy is going to want to be the highest paid player in the league. You can try to keep him under that, but I think ultimately that's where this will go.
Yeah, I think that's where it starts, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, you can try and you can point to comparables and say, no, you're a 11.5 or you're a $12 million player. You're not going to get anywhere with that, but you can try. So you're ultimately probably end up in an area where he is the highest paid player in the league. But maybe it's a scenario like what McKinnon did, where he says, you know what, I'm going to be the highest paid player in the league. The PA wants that. My agent wants that. I want that. But I'm not $1 million more valuable than McDavid, so give me $100,000 more.
Right.
And so he gets to 12.6, and so now this could Matthews say 12.7? Yeah, it's possible. Could he do?
Because now McKinnon makes 12.6, right? Yeah. So if you want to do the same thing that McKinnon did to David, then you would go 12.7 if you're Matthews.
Yeah, my suspicion is he probably ends up around 13. That's my guess. That's a big number. I certainly don't love that coming out of my mouth when I hear that, but I think that's probably where he ends up, and I think that's probably fair. So then you got to think about, okay, what's our term here? Because I don't want to be in a situation, as we discussed earlier, where we say, here's 13 times 3, and obviously he's a big goal scorer. I suspect he'll score 50 goals again sometime in the next 3 years, and then in 3 years he comes up and he's 28, still in his prime, and says, well, now the cap is $95 million, and so now I need $18 million, as opposed to lock him in for, let's say, 6 years, and the cap goes up and he's at 13, and 13's maybe not as scary of a number anymore, and you've got some room to build around him. Like, this team was so hurt by the fact that the cap just didn't go up, and that's out of their control. COVID happened and whatever happened that didn't allow for those same increases or those projected increases. But yeah, you need to get to a point where that number just doesn't hurt as much anymore. So I think, long story short, I think he signs. I think he wants to be here. The team wants him here. They'll do whatever they possibly can to keep him here. But he's not going to sign for. They're not going to give him $15 million, and I suspect they won't give him $14 million either. So that's why I'm kind of arriving at 13. And if he comes in and says, I want 15 and I'm not budging, then you're looking at a difficult conversation.
I don't think the Leafs want to give him a cent more than $13 million per year. And I don't think Matthews wants a year more than 4 years. And I think that's going to be the sticking point. That's going to be tough if you're the Leafs to get a number that works on a 4-year deal. Because for Matthews, and we've talked about this, if the cap is going up over the next 3 years about $11 million roughly, like those are the projections, and we'll see when this whole escrow thing gets figured out and whatever happens there. But say it does go up $11 million. Austin doesn't want to be on a bargain contract. He's a guy who's willing to bet on himself, right? Yeah. So he doesn't, and that's why I think even 4 years feels like a bit of a stretch if things go to plan. Like if I'm Matthews, I'm looking at a 3-year deal that's comfortable. That gets you into that range of when the cap has gone up. You're still the highest paid player in the league. You're still sticking around in Toronto, but then you're even younger when you're re-signing again. Yeah. And so that's just how I see it. And I have a mock deal here on the board, 12.7, making him the highest paid player in the league by $100K for 3 years. Would you vomit if that was the deal?
No, I wouldn't love the 3 years. I don't love the 3 years. I want him here for longer.
Yeah, 8 ideally.
Yeah, 8 ideally. He's the face of your team. To say would I vomit? It's not. It's not that bad. For me, it's just the term. But I think you're right. I think ultimately this negotiation is going to come down to term, and there's different things that the Leafs can throw and try that they can use to their advantage. They are one of the few teams in the league that can transfer a lot of the guy's base salary to July 1st signing bonuses and have the cash flow to do that. You can't do that if you're going to, Florida or Arizona or teams that don't have that cash flow. Yeah. So maybe there's a situation, and also you still get those payments if there's a lockout, if there's something that happens with the CBA. So maybe you're convincing them hey, you know what? I don't know when the CBA expires, admittedly, but let's say it's 5 years from now, 2027. Maybe you're convincing them hey, you know what? Do you really want to be walking into free agency right before a CBA expires? Whereas here, you know what? We can give you 6 years with certainty that you're going to get paid, and you're going to get paid all at once, which is really nice. You can stuff it in the bank, and then you just don't have to worry. Yeah. So maybe there's things like that could come up, but if it's 3 years, then he's got a lot of leverage. He has a lot of leverage, and you may just have to live with it, unfortunately. But then I guess that plays into the next guy as long as you're done talking about Austin. Yeah. Well, final point on Matthews. Final question I wanted to ask is, what is the point that it gets to where if you're Brad Treliving, you have to make a decision to trade the player? If you think he's not going to sign, what is the ceiling in terms of AAV or term where you're just we can't get this done and we have to recoup assets? Is that the goal for Treliving, or do you risk it and let him walk? Yeah, I think part of it will be a bit of a lawyer answer, but it's I think it's at the point where you just reasonably you reasonably believe that you could not build a team of the caliber you desire around that contract. Right. So if it's at an AAV that is just so extraordinarily high that you're not going to have any money to spend on peripheral players, and let's call that $15 million, because if the cap is 81.5 or 82 or whatever it is, 15 is going to hurt. That's a lot. It's going to hurt. That's on top of what he's already making plus $4 million. That's 20+%. So you can only go up to 20%, I guess, of the cap. So it'd be around 20% or so. Yeah. But if you get to a situation like that where you look at this contract and you say, sure, the ownership would write a blank check, but then I'm not going to have any money to spend on a goalie, or I'm going to have to trade, a top defenseman, or I'm going to have to move on from, all the guys on my third line or whatever it is, then I think that's a point where you say we have to look at other options. AAV, I guess, is a little bit less concerning, so you just kind of make it work. But same thing, if you get the sense of this guy just doesn't want to be here long term, he's not committed to this city, and will, whatever that is, then that's something to look at as well. 3 years is kind of around that sweet spot where I think it could go either way. If he says I want to be here for 2 2 years at 15, then, you know, I might be sitting back saying, okay, this guy's not committed.
Yeah.
And you might look at other options, but I'd say those are kind of the two things. He's just such an anomaly. You know, the caliber of player he is, where, you know, you kind of just have to make it work to the best you can, and you're not. You know, I don't think they're going to drive like as hard of a. You know, I don't think they're going to bargain with as hard of a cap as they may with, you know, guys who are lower down in your lineup, is what I'll say.
Like a William Nylander, even, who is a superstar, but is clearly not in the same tier of superstar that Matthews is. So I think the ceiling on Nylander in terms of negotiations, I think, would be pretty clear. To Brad Treliving, whether that's $10 million, whether that's less than 3 years, whatever it be. But okay, so that's Matthews. And for the record, you said you're okay with a $14.9 million deal as long as it's under 15. That's what you said, and we'll go with that.
You're gonna radio me.
So Nylander now. And we'll talk about him relatively briefly because, again, he is in kind of that second tier. And there's just been less chatter about Nylander. I don't really know. Like, obviously, he's just been overshadowed by everything going on in Toronto. But there's been significantly less chatter about the Nylander situation, even though it is essentially the exact same situation as Matthews. He is available, or he is able rather, to sign a deal on the same day that Matthews can, and he's going to get a pay increase. So I have a deal on the board for William Nylander, a 5-year deal at $9.5 million AAV. Would you be okay with something like that, or where do you value Nylander in terms of how much money he makes on an annual basis?
Yeah, this is a weird one, because face value, take the Leafs out of this, and you just even take Nylander out of this. You just present me with, this is a 40-goal scorer, or a guy who's scored 40 goals, we'll call him, because he's only done it once. A guy who's coming off of 40 goals, he's relatively young, you know, had a pretty good playoffs, all of these things, and you say you can have him at 5 times 9.5, there's a strong chance that I would say, yeah, you know what, I like that. And I think there's a lot of other teams that would say I like that too. Always preferable if you could get him at a slightly lower AAV. But that type of guy is probably going for minimum 8.5 these days. But the complication, of course, is, you know, it being the Leafs, it being Nylander, where does it fit in? Because, as you've said, he's overshadowed. He's second fiddle in terms of stardom, in terms of goal scoring on this team. And he's just going to have to eat whatever Matthews doesn't kill, essentially. Like, if Matthews, again, we'll use the $15 million number, which I don't think is going to happen. But if Matthews signs for $15 million, then no, I'm not signing Nylander to 9.5, because you can't.
You're not signing him, period.
You're not signing him. Well, you know, if he wants to stick around at $6.5, $7 million, then sure. You know, but if you can get Matthews at let's say he signs that 12.7, you know, $1 million a year contract, then you know what, I think it would be real hard to walk away from Nylander at that value. You know, because I do ultimately think it's in his wheelhouse of what he's worth. But again, you got to kind of take a step back and say, okay, these are two guys who would be signed at, doing the quick math in my head, just over $22 million. You know, can we afford to put a team around these guys, especially in this season, this coming season, where you're still going to have Marner signed at nearly 11. You're going to have Tavares signed at 11. You're going to have Morgan Riley signed at 7 or whatever he
7.5.
You need to re-sign Samsonov. You know, so the rest
got some holes to fill in the lineup.
Like, all of a sudden, we're at, you know, just off the top of my head, we're at nearly $50 million. Or at $50 million. You know, so there's not much to work with. So it's going to be a tough decision. I'm going to reserve judgment on would I do it, yes or no, because it's so tied in, I think, to what Matthews signs for. I think the contract you presented is fair, and I think that's what he's going to look for. And I think if he went to the market, he would get that. Obviously, on the premise that he has a good season again this year.
Yes, of course.
But there's and this is why you got to sign Matthews first, because you can't make the decision until everything else is worked out.
Yeah, and I even wonder if that's something, like if you're Brad Treliving, if that's something that you bring to Matthews in negotiations.
Would.
If you say, hey, like, sure, we could give you 14, but how about 12.7 and you get to keep Willie?
I would.
Do you like playing with Willie?
Yeah.
I think you do like playing with Willie. He's pretty good on the power play, don't you think?
Yeah. 100% I would be saying that to him. You'd say, yeah, of course, like, you want to win a playoff round, you want to win a Stanley Cup.
Yeah.
Look around at all these teams in years past who haven't really won with those types of guys.
Yeah.
I guess this year might be the first year where somebody's going to win with a double-digit player with an AAV.
Yeah. Nobody over 10 million.
Yeah.
3 players who do make 10 million, but nobody over.
Nobody over.
So they're like, nobody makes over $10 million.
Is Eichel at 10 even?
Eichel's at 10 even.
I thought he was 10.5.
Bobrovsky is 10 even.
Yeah.
And I think there's one more. No, Stone I think is 9.5. And Barkov.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was looking at that today. But again, like, this is something that we talked about a few weeks ago on the podcast, because every time this gets brought up, it's like, percentage of the cap, and it's like, okay, actually, most years, someone who makes over $10 million wins. And also, too, I saw, Alan Walsh, the famous, the agent provocateur, is the podcast that he does.
Yeah.
But he posted on his Instagram story that back in 2002, before the hard cap was introduced, Joe Sakic was making $17 million a year.
Guys were making a lot of money back then.
That's insane.
Yeah. So, there's a lot of money. A lot of money then. But anyways, I hate to give the boring answer on Nylander, but it just depends. It just depends.
Yeah. No, I feel it. And I think they are so tied that I understand where you're coming from, because you can't have one without knowing what happens to the other.
Exactly.
So I get that.
Yeah, and I guess the other factor there, just to quickly wrap up on that point, is also, like, maybe that's just the guy that you ultimately decide is the one that needs to go if you want to change the complexion of your team. So maybe you're not even left to make that decision. Maybe you just decide whether it's, well, I wouldn't say you just don't resign him, but if you decide we're going to move on from somebody, then maybe that's the guy.
It's a lot easier to make that decision with a guy like Nylander as opposed to a guy like Matthews. And really, like, you can't move John Tavares. No. So it's between Nylander and Marner.
Yeah.
One of those guys kills penalties, plays both ways, gets more points.
Yeah, the argument, I guess, would be just, one of them was better in the playoffs this year.
Exactly.
Which was 88.
Yeah. But, and the year before, and the year before that.
Yeah. But also one of them's out for the Selkies. So.
Yep. Yeah. Exactly. I'm a Nylander guy, so I don't want to bring my bias into this at all. But I know who I would trade if I had to pick one of the core 4, even though there are great reasons to keep all the players on the team. But